Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time again to join us on our midweek study, going through the book of Judges, chapter 19. And this is going to be probably one of the most challenging sessions for me to teach because it has one of the most, there are a lot of disturbing stories in the Bible. Don't get me wrong there. There are some that are challenging, but this one is right up near the top for me as being the most difficult to understand, the most disturbing morally on what's about to happen. Um, and just all around, it's a tough one. So we'll just try to lay it out there as best I can. Again, not going to make any judgments or conclusions. Sometimes that's saying it is what it is, and best sums it up. So, with that, just tenseful introduction, let's jump into this today. You see on your screen, we are sharing, and you see the map here of Israel. This is the one that we've been pretty commonly looking at, but my cursor is going around the middle of this map, showing that the story is centered around Bethlehem, Jerusalem, and in a place called Shiloh, which doesn't show up on the map. So I have another map here to take us a little bit closer. So Shiloh is here in the tribe of Ephraim. We see the tribe of Benjamin tucked in under Ephraim, and there's a city of Gibeah, there's a city of Jerusalem, and there's a city of Bethlehem. So this is the hotbed focus of our lesson today. So we pick up in Judges chapter 19 with this I'll just say it's an infamous beginning. It says, "And it came to pass in those days that there was no king in Israel." We've seen this before. We've know that this usually means something not very good is going to happen because it's kind of an indicator that there was lawlessness, that there was pretty much anarchy of just people doing what they wanted to do. And we've talked before on why it mattered that there was a king there, um, from both a spiritual aspect and a societal aspect. You know, the societal meaning that things weren't governed and that there was no um, there was lawlessness and there was no civility. People who committed crimes were not being held responsible for their crimes. There was no implication of any police force or any military to help keep civility and help keep the peace. So that's a lot packed into this little phrase here, just on the civil side, let alone on the side of spirituality of what is missing there. But again, I feel that there was no um, excuse for them on the side of spirituality because the Shiloh is where the tent of meeting was. There was the priests there, there was the Levites, and but yet everything's all kind of jumbled up, and we're going to see that in a big way today. So here was a certain Levite. Um, we're going to say, think holy man or holy person. And with that in mind, we're going to find he operates in anything but that way. So he was sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim. And again, this is very disturbing, but he took himself a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judea. Now, the whole term of concubine and wife is, again, very challenging. We can look at the Hebrew here, it gives us a little bit of indication. I'm circling around the Hebrew words that talk about that's translated as concubine. And in Hebrew, it actually has it two different words, which the English didn't quite pick it up. It uses the first word, isha, which hovering over here, you'll see the flyout that will say woman, wife, female. And then over the next one, the H6370 talks about a concubine or paramour. Um, and so these two words are a little challenging for us in our 21st century mind to understand this. But in Hebrew culture, or in culture of that day, a wife would be someone who had a marriage contract, and that would make her able to own property, able to be entitled to a dowry. It was mainly financial links to that, financial protection for the woman, and it would protect her from just being cast aside. She could get a divorce, but with that divorce would come financial um, retribution, a kind of like an alimony, as we would say today. And so a wife would have a contract. A concubine would not have a contract. And so even though sometimes it'll paint a concubine in a very negative way, it was just a woman who was taken advantage of, and the man didn't give her a contract, but yet she was aligning herself with him to be provided for. Even if it wasn't long term, she is giving herself just to be housed and fed and have some sort of a resemblance of a life of being taken care of and not being cast off, because women were unfortunately treated as property back then. They weren't given a lot of opportunities to advance themselves. And so here is a woman, a young girl, we're going to find out, who's really out on luck, and finds this guy to join herself to. So with that thought in mind, let's go back to the English slides here. And so he took a young lady, a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah, and here it says that she was not faithful to him. But trying to understand how he found her in the first place, it says that she went from him unto her father's house and was there 4 whole months. So we're going to see what was happening here, because there's some things that just don't add up as to where she came from, how she got to be joined to this Levite, where was the father in all of this. Those things we're going to take a look at. So again, she went and left him basically and went to her father's house and was there 4 months. Now we get to verse 3. It's very interesting that uh, the husband arose, and notice it says husband before it says that they called him a certain Levite. And we're going to take a look at the Hebrew and just see what was going on with why this terminology is changing. So we get to verse 3. It says, arose her husband. It's using the word isha. This is key for us because in the Bible, the Hebrew gives different words for husbands. There is the isha, which is noted as a husband who is loving, caring, benevolent, has the higher qualities of being chivalrous and compassionate. And then there is the word for husband called Baal, which is the same word used for Baal, which actually means master, which when that is used for husband, it gives you the idea that he's domineering, he's owning her as property, not treating her very well at all. So here, whatever happened, there seems to be a change in this relationship. And it gives us little clues that now he's calling himself an Isha, he's going after her, and he's going to speak to her kindly. And packed in the Hebrew here is something very interesting. It uses the word davar. And what this means in Hebrew is these are words that come from his innermost being. And even the word kindly to her, if you open it up, it talks about the heart. It's the word for liba, which is the word for heart. And so what's interesting here, he's speaking words from his heart. So what I get the impression of is that he did not treat her very well in the beginning. He must have found her. She had, I believe, run away from home, was out on her luck, joined herself to this guy. He was not nice to her. He treated her bad. And so she left and went back home again. And now he's reconsidering, coming to her, speaking words from the heart, speaking kindly to her, and wants to rejoin and resume this relationship. And so he's coming with his servant, which shows that he's somewhat well-to-do. He's coming with gifts. He's bringing donkeys, and he comes to her father's house. And this is what makes it really interesting, is because he comes to the father's house, and when the father of this, who was previously called a concubine played the prostitute or the whore, now look at the words that's being used, calling her a damsel. And even in the Hebrew, it talks about her as a young woman, a servant girl, a little girl, a maid, female attendant. So we get the impression that this is a very young girl who ran away from home. Um, the father is not calling her derogatory names, and the father is glad to meet this guy, which none of this would have happened if she wouldn't have run away because under normal terms, the Levite would have went to the father, made some contract to acquire this young lady. There might have been a dowry, there might have been a marriage. And so here the father is happy to see him. So obviously they never met before. And so the father sees this Levite who is obviously in the priesthood. So he's a man, at least supposed to be associated with higher society, someone who has some morals and scruples and is a good guy, is what he's thinking. And so he rejoiced to meet him. And now the terminology changes. Here, he's not just called the father of the damsel, he's called father-in-law. So it's showing that this relationship is changing. So let's look at the word for father-in-law. And it to do that, you have to undergo a marriage. You have to undergo some different type of circumstances than just normally thought of as somewhat property. So we see the relationship deepening here. The Levite is somewhat, um, you know, getting to be a nicer person and doing the right thing and trying to treat her properly. And so the father is very happy. And so here we see from, verses 4 through 9 is this play, if you will, of the father trying to keep the daughter home, which again gives an indication that maybe she had run away and that he was just so happy to have her back and didn't want her to leave again. And again, notice there are no names for any of these people. We have a Levite, we have a father, we have a young lady, a woman, and no names are given to them. And so the father tries to hold them there, kept them 3 days. They eat and they drink and they lodged and they're having, is this a wedding ceremony? Is this a way where now he's called father-in-law? Um, we really are not quite sure. We'll have to watch the language as we go on. And it came to pass on the fourth day that, he tried to rise and leave. And here again, look how she's called. She's called damsel. The damsel's father said to his son-in-law. So I believe that a wedding took place. I believe that this woman gone from at least concubine, or should have gone from concubine to wife because of the terminology being used and the happiness of it. So he's trying to keep her there, stay a while. Verse 5, verse 6, they stayed again. And, this is going on for a few days. And finally, we get to verse 7. The father-in-law arises trying to hold him there, and 5 days goes by in verse 8. And you can imagine how passionate this father must have been to not lose his daughter, how much he must have loved her and wanted him to stay. But of course, the Levite was having nothing to do with it. And then the language changes here a little bit in verse 9. It says, "The man rose up to depart, he and his concubine." Okay, that shows that maybe he's getting irritated. Maybe things are just not going so well. And so the servant, the father-in-law, damsel's father, play on words here, trying to figure out what's really going on, and said, the day's growing far spent. He's using any type of excuse to get them to stay as long as possible. But it reaches ahead in verse 10 where the guy says, "No way, I'm not going." But it's late. And so traveling in the dark and at night was precarious, dangerous, because this was a wilderness in some ways. And so he departed and he traveled to this city called Jebus, which is Jerusalem. Well, it wasn't called Jerusalem yet. And we're going to find also that Jerusalem was not a city that was assimilated into the nation of Israel at this time. It doesn't happen until later on David goes to Jerusalem and conquers it. And there's a whole fascinating episode where that takes place. And of course, Jerusalem is not at this point the city of God at this point. The tabernacle is not there. All of this is yet in the future, but the writer is letting us know that this city is Jebus, which is Jerusalem, and it says his donkeys are with him. And again, unfortunately, this lady's name was now reduced to concubine and was with him also. And when they got to Jebus in verse 11, the day was far spent. And of course, the servant says, "Let's stay here. This is getting dangerous. We can't make it to the next city, and let's lodge here." And the master said unto him, again, look at the terminology. It went from Levite to master. So he's getting emphatic. His will is going to be what's going to happen. And he says, we're not going to turn aside to the city of a stranger. It's not the children of Israel. We will pass on to Gibeah. So this is where it gets interesting. And they make it to Gibeah. And again, this city did not have any Super 8s or Hiltons or Motel 6s or anything like that. There was no place to lodge, and they couldn't find anything. Now, what's interesting here about Gibeah is Gibeah was a very strange city. If you remember, a long time ago, we were in the book of Joshua, and there was a group of people that came to Joshua that pretended that they were on a long journey and pretended that they were from a far city and that they came to make a peace treaty with Joshua because they had heard that Joshua was taking the nation of Israel and pretty much conquering everybody in his path. And so they knew that they were going to be next. And so the Gibeonites put on this big charade that they were from a faraway country, traveled so long, they wore shoes that were wore out. They took bags of provision that had moldy food in it. They had ratty clothes that looked like they had been, living in them for weeks and weeks and months. And so they came to Joshua and said, we're from a far country, let's form this treaty and we want peace. And Joshua didn't inquire of the Lord, signed the peace treaty, and sent them on their way. And afterwards, they ripped off their old garments and said, "Aha, we tricked you. We're really from Gibeon, just down the road here, but now you made an oath to us, and you can't conquer us, and you can't kill us." And then Joshua said, "Okay, you're going to be servants and cut wood, basically, all your days." That's what Gibeah was all about. Things have changed in Gibeah. Gibeah seemed to be this little um, bad spot in the midst of the nation, and we're going to find that not any good thing is going to be happening here in Gibeah. And so I think that's probably a good place to stop with that kind of cliffhanger for you here, that these men are going to spend the night in Gibeah. The Gibeonites were deceitful. They tricked Joshua. They ended up not maintaining their loyalty and subservience to the Israelites. And we're going to see what that really bad choice and mistake by Joshua way back in the book of Joshua, what's going to happen with that now. So with that, stay tuned next week, and you're going to find some really hair-raising things that are going to happen in Gibeah. So God bless you all. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Thanks so much again for listening, and we'll see you then. Bye-bye.